Today's guest is Cliff Washington, brand strategist, a designer, a creative consultant. He's got more than a decade of experience with brands we have all heard of: Disney, Nissan, Ann Taylor, AT&T, MTV, Black Entertainment Television, Paramount Network, Essence Communication. I am missing a bunch of stuff here, Cliff. Today, he is founder and chief brand officer for Duke and Joe, a boutique agency in New York City, and recently hosted a talk on hidden history, Black Americans in graphic design. Cliff, welcome today. Please take it away.
Thank you, Tor, for that great intro. And just real quick on how Tor came across me because of the hidden history presentation. And he reached out, I believe, via LinkedIn first.
Right.
And we had a really great first discussion, just going over a bunch of stuff. And it led to me agreeing to coming on here. And it's great to see all you guys. It's great to see a couple of your faces and a bunch of names.
But hey, folks, if you're able to turn on your cameras, that would be great. No pressure though, like no requirement for that.
But with that, I would like to share my screen so I can go through a chronology of who I am and what I've done, and you can view some of my work, and then we can transition into more of a discussion. So Tor, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Oops. And can you see my screen okay, Tor?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go into presentation mode. Actually, no, let me get out of that because I can't see you guys. So this will be fine. As Tor said, my name is Cliff Washington. I'm a designer and strategist. Who am I? As Tor said, I have 10 plus years of experience as a design professional. And I've lived in New York City for going on 15 years now. I'm originally from upstate New York in Saratoga Springs. And my experience spans across crafting digital experiences, creative direction, motion design, identity, market development, brand strategy, and mentoring young designers. More recently, I've transitioned from senior design management to creative leadership as a brand strategist and creative consultant. And this is like a collage of some of my artistic interests and general interests in travel and food and such, and interest in music. And this is something I put together just to kind of as an expression of things that have influenced me. And this is kind of a short timeline of going from education into the professional field. In 2006, I graduated from the University of Hartford with a BFA in illustration and minor in graphic design. And then in 2007, I got a position at Freeze Inc. as an apparel designer. And then I worked a few apparel jobs, I think for about 4 or 5 years. And then I transitioned into advertising and digital media at Town Square Media, where I did ad product design for brands like Nissan, Disney's, Lucasfilm, and McDonald's. And that's where I really cut my teeth in advertising and media. From there, I went to Hot 97, and I was a digital designer at Hot 97, working on identity design, website design, newsletter design, event design, managing and hiring designers. And at Hot 97 it was a very trying time for myself within my career, but I probably grew more at Hot 97 than I did at any other place I've been, almost any other place I've been at in my career. And so after about 3 years there, in that time period, I created the Creators Life podcast, which is a podcast about having conversations with creative professionals, learning about their stories, thoughts, and on other various topics. After I got as much as I can out of Hot 97, I then transitioned to Essence Ventures, which is a Black women's lifestyle focused magazine, where I was a senior designer and led ideation. And as part of the digital design team, was art director at Essence Fest, which is a yearly festival down in New Orleans that celebrates Black culture, basically, and also celebrates Black women. And then from there, I became a senior digital designer at Viacom CBS, which was kind of the one of the biggest points of my career in terms of being in management and managing designers and the type of accounts that we had and the department that I was part of. I learned a lot there in terms of management and being efficient in leadership. It was a very kind of traditional corporate role. So anyways, jumping in some of the work, I'll show you some of the stuff I did. I'll start actually with some of the clothing stuff. At this point, I was at Weissner Products, is one of the apparel companies I work with, where I did some outerwear for boys outerwear design, and it spanned um, different licenses like Hanna-Barbera, Warner Brothers, and then also some more generic stuff where it was more so just me kind of coming up with ideas, concept and ideas to sell. And then transitioning into town square media, into digital advertising and media. This is where I started to be able to work on licenses like Star Wars and McDonald's, but then also where I started to dip my toe into UX design as well. And then Hot 97, when I got there, this is where I flourish in terms of event design. I did digital billboard advertising for Summer Jam back in, what was that, 2018. And up to that point, I hadn't done something with that amount of out of home visibility, which was really cool. I actually went down to Times Square and took photos of the billboards down there. And then at this time, Snapchat was really big in the social space and with social filters. So I did graphics for Day Of, and then also Hot for the Holidays, and also did illustrations for a documentary, or a kind of a short documentary Hot 97 did on the Notorious B.I.G. And I also redesigned the
Just
walls.
as
I'm sorry, Tor.
sorry to interrupt you, Cliff,
No
but
problem.
students may not realize this, but Hot 97 is one of the hottest stations in New York. I mean, we're here on the West Coast, so like Hot 97, what? But for New York City, everyone would, even if you hated Hot 97, you knew what it was. So
Yeah, like I think Hot 97 was one of the first commercial hip hop radio stations in New York. Grew up listening to it, and then, well, when I would make trips down to New York, and my family's from New York, I would hear Hot 97, and then 20 years later, being able to work there was pretty cool. So I did a redesign of the interior walls of the Hot 97 studio, along with some other designers and art director that I was working with at the time. Um, and this was actually probably the coolest thing I worked on while I was there. Um, it was quite a thing to see the actual digital mocks turn into physical, seeing the physical manifestation of them. And then when I was at Essence, I had a foray into motion graphics, and then also doing more event graphics for Essence Festival. Was able to travel and art direct a team that we had down in New Orleans for a promotion of different events throughout the day and the evening. So just quickly, I'll go through some of the work I've done at Duke and Joe, my branding and creative consultancy. One of the recent projects that I did was the Liberated Us, which is a group therapy practice based in liberation-based therapy and healing. So throughout the process, we went through a whole brand strategy process and came up with a stylescape that kind of laid out the vision of what the brand could be. From there, we were able to take creative direction into the brand identity phase. And this is the mark that I came up with the designer that was working with me on the project, and kind of how it turned out and different variations and use case scenarios. And then also Eden Co-op, which I worked on for this creative entrepreneurship group that I'm a part of. And in this role, I played designer and art director. And it was a similar thing where we came up with a stylescape to set the creative direction for the look and feel of the brand. And then from there, we went through some other kind of brand identity iterations, but a large part of what I did was art direction on pitch deck. So the last point that I'll go through before we open it up is just going over some important, I think, milestones and turning points in my career. One was leadership at Carl Kanai. I was an art director there, and then working permalance at Town Square Media. Excuse me, when I switched from apparel to advertising and digital design. Discovering the Future on YouTube, which kind of led me down the path to creative entrepreneurship. Hiring Designers at Hot 97, which was my first foray into management. Art directing at Essence Fest was one of my first forays into kind of large scale art direction. And senior management at Viacom CBS, learning about the corporate structure, and joining Jose Caballero's creative entrepreneurship group. One of my mentors is Keone Chong, who is an ex-agency owner, brand futurist, and cultural architect. He really helped me kind of pivot my career from strictly design to adding on strategy and facilitation. So some questions that I asked myself within that process is, what are my core values in that process of pivoting? What are my core values? What are not my core values? How can I identify them, and why are they important to me? So some keys in my career pivoting, accepting that there are no shortcuts exist, committing to a steady march, taking small actions, even imperfect ones, explore without expectation, embracing my unique journey, recrafting your narrative, recrafting your new narrative, avoid relying solely on your existing network, pursuing energy instead of passion, and trusting your instincts. And that is my short presentation and some social media platforms that I'm on, and where my podcast is.
So Cliff, going back to like slides 24 through 27 here, like in 24, like each of these stages in your life, and just as an aside, permalance is like semi-permanent freelance. If a student doesn't know what permalancing is, it's a way for a designer to get work without actually being like
a full-time employee.
So you're probably going to come across that yourselves as you foray out into the design universe. I feel like probably these turning points are connected to all the points you mentioned in slide 27. Like there's something you learned at each of these turning points, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes.
A specific thing. So like go in slide 27. I feel like we could probably talk about all of these. Could you pick, I don't know, one or two that you feel like are the most important ones, and talk about how that happened at those turning points, or like, is there a story behind it?
Okay, so two that stand out: one, embrace your journey, and two, actually, let me pick three because it's kind of hard to choose between those two. One, take small actions, even imperfect ones. Two, embracing your unique journey. And then 7, avoid relying solely on your existing network. So number 3, I think a pattern that I've had, and I still battle today, is impatience. And the patience, I think progress is related to the amount of patience you have, but also related to how interested you are in your own self-development. So I found that the more I was interested in my self-development, the faster things would happen. And even though it might not be on a timeline that I wanted, I had to have a certain amount of patience for when things would kind of naturally happen on their own. So when I'm at a point where I feel that I'm being a bit more curious about my own self-development, a genuine patience would come over me, if this is making sense, that there are certain steps within the journey that are specific to your own personal journey that you'll take, where you'll start to find, or you start to experience, as we go down to you embracing your unique journey, that these incremental steps will happen that will help lead to your progress. And it's not something that you can really force. It's kind of, like I said, a self-discovery that happens. And then 7, relying solely on your existing network. I had to learn over time that a lot of times the people that you're closest to, because that relationship is so close, it's hard for them to be able to step out of the experience that they have with you to see you objectively. That's extremely hard for people that you're very close to. When you're dealing with other people with maybe within a professional network or a mentoring network or with a inspirational network that that don't really know you as well. They can offer insights outside of insights that are more objective. And that was something that was extremely crucial when it came to the guidance that Keone offered me, and how he was able to contextualize my career and life and what that meant for the next step of it.
I think that's really important at point 7, because we do tend to get stuck in our, like, collectively in a rut with our friends, right? And they will get used to your work, and they just can't be as objective as they would be. You want them to be, right? So don't be afraid to branch out and get more feedback from people. Although I'm pretty harsh with students, so just, FYI.
And those friends are important too. Like I definitely have those friends that aren't gonna hold back. They're gonna, tell you what they think and about your work and what's not working and everything. Um, so it can be kind of a balance. But when it comes to transformation
Mhm.
and going forward to new places, it takes somebody that isn't quite as familiar with everything that's going on with you.
What do you mean in number 8 here? Pursue energy instead of passion.
Okay, so when I was coming up in the New York media and advertising scene, it was kind of the first. It was the first. I don't want to say the first time. It was the first time for me, and I think for my millennial generation of that particular era, we started hearing the phrase "follow your passion." You know what I mean? And at first, I think um, it was very much a good thing. The reasons behind it, but very soon it kind of bled into hustle culture and basically killing yourself to get ahead. And also, there was a certain impracticality to some of the advice when it came to aligning what you felt your purpose was and what was going to be able to sustain you financially. Both things are important. Purpose to sustain you, heart wise and emotionally, but it's also important to be able to like put food on the table. So a lot of times we have to understand the difference between purpose for um, personal satisfaction and fulfillment and what can be done outside of our workspace, but then also how does purpose relate to what we do on a daily basis. So there will definitely be some crossover. I'm not saying I'm just going to go work any job, but there has to be some type of linking and alignment to what the market needs, what you're good at, and what's going to be able to make you money. So sometimes it takes a while to be able to find those cross sections. But to understand that I do have passions that right now aren't going to make me money, but um, they fulfill me in another sense, and I can do them without the expectation of some type of financial gain.
And I feel like passions and interests change over time too, right? I mean, you don't have
Yes.
this when you graduated in 2006, was it? I think you had just a different perspective on things and different interests, right?
Mhm. No, I did. And the thing that held me back was having a very narrow idea about what my passions were and what I could embrace for something that could change from just a straight passion to something that I could actually have a career in. Over time, as it happened within the past year, I recognized that I do really enjoy design, but I wanted to add on the skill of strategy and facilitation because that started to be even more of a passion than graphic design. So um, I had to allow myself the ability to say, okay, I had to, I had to be able to say thank you to graphic design for all that you've done for me. But now I'm ready to step into something that's more of an interest for me right now. Knowing that, graphic design is still part of what I do, but more so right now, it's probably going to be for my own personal interests and, um, yeah, for my own personal interests.
Right, right. Hey, students, if you have any questions, please just jump in or ask in text chat. I have more questions, but
Sure.
Bethany, did you raise your hand? No. Okay. Um, I want to go back to the process like you have in 21, slides 21 and slides 15, where you're talking about some of your work here and the landscape you're doing here. This
Okay.
sort of reminds me of what we call elsewhere we call a mood board
Hmm.
ish.
Hmm.
Um, but could you talk more about your process in developing this?
Sure. So, okay, let me start at the top. When we get when we're able to kind of close a project at Duke and Joe. So, um, if it's say for a brand identity project, we'll start with going through a strategy session, discovery, where we're learning about the brand, the values, their users, um, and their business goals. And there are other parts of it, thinking about um, the impact narrative and also attribute clustering that goes even deeper. But generally, the three main parts of brand, user, and goals. So I don't now move forward with brand identity projects or any projects, whatever they are, unless I have a basic understanding of what's needed. Oftentimes, a client will come to you with are what they feel they need to accomplish, but many times, or a lot of the times, it's a brain dump. They'll just dump, things that have been rattling off in their head without actually understanding if it's something that's going to help their business move forward. So going through discovery, even though we're definitely going to help them accomplish the design needs that they have that they spelled out coming into the engagement, we're going to we're going to do a deep dive in discovery, and many times throughout that process we discover, okay, maybe you didn't actually need this one particular thing. Oh, what you need to accomplish this goal is this other thing. So when it comes to scoping out work and pricing, um, i I have a better idea of exactly what needs to be done in the scope and the price by going through discovery and figuring out and having insights into what they actually need instead of at the front just pricing out everything. Because my problem in the beginning of my career was pricing out everything on front and then things changing before we even get to the design process. So the scope would change and then it would end up being more work than what they paid for. So the discovery process helps take that middle part out um, of misalignment between what's actually needed. Because what happens with clients is they get into the process and naturally think, oh, well, I actually want to add this on. I want to add that on. And it's not strategic. So you're, for lack of a better term, shooting at a moving target instead of, having a bullseye. So what happens is throughout the process, at the end of the discovery process, I create a stylescape. It's a slightly different from a mood board in the sense of it's a little bit more customized than sometimes a mood board might be. But we lay out the creative direction when it comes to type, when it comes to what will influence the logo, when it comes to what will influence the color palette, how photos will look, how supporting graphic elements will look, how the website might look. So once we have agreement with that within discovery process, it makes every part of it after when it comes to design deliverables, whether it's the logo, the website, app design, product design, packaging, whatever. It makes it more easier because we're talking from a common aesthetic language.
So, is this just one meeting you have with the client, or is it a series of meetings? Is it surveys? Like,
Mhm.
how do you do the discovery itself?
Mhm. So normally the discovery process is about 2 to 3 days. It's about, I would say, 2 weeks in total. Once you account for the design of the stylescape and changes that inevitably happen, and putting the brief together at the end, and then from there, say if it's a brand identity project, it'll be the last one was about a month and a week and a half or so for the entire thing because it was logo and supporting graphic elements. It was actually naming the actual business, the DBA. What else was it? Um, there was something else too, but there was a couple other deliverables, but that was about the timeline. So um, when I said before that I made the transition, it wasn't necessarily leaving design completely behind. It's just that for my own personal part, it's being in an engagement as the strategist and facilitator, and then offloading the design process to a designer. So within this project, a girl I used to work with at Essence, I brought her on to be the graphic designer for this project, and I gave a creative direction for this particular, well, not for this project, but for the Liberated Us project. I gave her creative direction for that.
So you're the art director.
Yeah.
Right. You know, I've made that change over my career as well. Before I taught, from graphic design to then art direction, where graphic design is just part of the process now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the full process,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, man, there was something I was going to ask you as part of that. Okay, so you go through the discovery process, you create the landscape, and that's when you finalize like scope and pricing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you actually do the project from there.
Yes. Yep. Again, because once you have a full idea about what's on the client's mind, you can more specifically price out their needs, as opposed to them giving you an idea about what they want and then changing scope within the process. And also, but also setting out from the beginning, letting them know, okay, in the proposal process, because that I write the proposal after the discovery. If there is a change in scope, this will have to go back and rescope the project to a different price,
Right.
instead of, going with that same pricing structure, because they've changed it. That's all signed. That's all spelled out in the proposal and the contracts.
Emily, I see you have a question.
Yeah. My question was like, how do you go about telling a client what they need rather than what they want if they are very set on something specific that you may not see work well for the project?
That's a very good question. So what I'll do is, well, number one, it's kind of how I position myself. So because I'm now working as a creative consultant and brand strategist, the way they kind of receive me is different than just being a straight graphic designer. As a graphic designer, which there's nothing wrong with doing that, but a lot of times you're perceived as somebody that takes orders, if that's a way I can say it. So when it comes to strategy, a lot of times they're coming to you for particular answers, right? So, and then also it depends on the qualifying process. So if you're dealing with somebody in first meetings and you're getting a sense that they more so, even as a graphic designer, freelance graphic designer, if you're getting the sense that they don't actually want to hear your opinion about things that you're experienced in, then that might disqualify you from even working with them in the first place, which is a difficult process because we're dealing with dollars and cents. And you, especially first coming out of college, you don't want to turn away any job. And I think coming out of college, it's very important to just kind of take, I don't want to say anything that you can, but take whatever reasonable projects come your way, even if you're not able to kind of set the agenda. So from a freelance design side, sometimes you can't control that. Once you have a few years of experience in the industry, you can better set your ground rules. I think that's kind of the entire thing, setting your ground rules, and having a qualifying process and seeing if the client passes that. Otherwise, once you get the ball rolling within the project, it's extremely hard to move the client off of that, off of their kind of position that they've taken about what they want, and also you have to be open to, sometimes they could have a really great idea, even if they're not experienced in design. They may just have a great idea about something. That's happened to me before. But I do think it's all about positioning and kind of owning your personal power as a designer.
Great question, Emily.
Does that answer your question, Emily?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much.
Something you just said. So, I feel like something that we probably don't talk about enough in design education is this process of working with clients and even legal contracts and scope and that sort of thing. Do you have any particular advice around, the people in the paperwork, so to speak?
So as a freelance designer, I it I took longer than I should have when it came to understanding the contract and legal processes, because they're just frankly boring, and I hated that stuff. Um, I mean,
Yes.
it is what it is. It's really boring. But the thing that kind of the thing that changed for me was realizing that the money I was making was directly related to how well I knew about contracts and what went into them. So once I had that realization, it was like, okay, I got to get my act together on this. I think one thing that helped me was doing what they call energy mapping, understanding the the tasks that give me energy, the tasks that sap my energy, and the tasks that I'm kind of midway about. So contracts was kind of in the midway point, and also being able to set aside time to, like, say, I don't know, on Mondays between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. is devoted to reading about contracts, understanding contracts. So that kind of time blocking helped me not feel so overwhelmed by it. I have some friends that are within the legal profession that could help me understand that a little bit. Um, so it's really a necessity, especially if you're working for yourself. And also, if you are in-house at a company, um, many times your ability to grow and move up to higher roles are associated with how well you know a lot of the business side or contract side. Because sometimes your job it'll involve being able to it'll involve dealing with people that might be on the contract and financial account side. So it helps to be able to know that stuff. And unfortunately, in a lot of design and programs, that stuff isn't really highlighted or focused on. But the contract side is very important because you kind of you you protect yourself from being screwed over by having a better relationship and better knowledge of your contracts.
Right. Yeah. Good boundaries are really important. So everybody knows how far they can go and what to expect and so on.
Mhm. So,
Um,
so I see Zara, if I'm saying her name
yeah,
correct.
Zara.
Yeah, I know you said you don't like, it's not your favorite part to go through contracts, but for a graphic designer who's just starting, what do you think are the most things to include in a contract?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, Number one would be locking down so I'm thinking about um, specifically scope of work right now when I say this, um, time period for the project. Um, that's extremely important to not keep from going out of that time span where you'll be spending time and losing money from a job because it wasn't spelled out in the contract and the client just wants to take up as much of your time as they can. Number two is um, within your SOW and maybe your master agreement. So I'm talking about two things: master agreement and your statement of work. Um, Statement of work for a particular project, master agreement for um, multiple projects that you might do with a client. But in either of them, I think laying out rules for revisions, because clients will inevitably go over the amount of revisions that you set, or they'll at least try to. And if you don't set it, they definitely will. They'll work you for revisions until your fingers fall off. So being very specific about that, and you have to continuously remind them within the project that, hey, we're on our first revision for the logo design. Hey, you've reached your second revision. Hey, you've reached your final revision. So keeping that constantly in their mind helps alleviate stresses for you down the road. Number three would be, I'm trying to kind of balance in my head which ones are most important. Um, Within your master agreement, um, making sure that it's okay with your client that you have the ability to put things on your portfolio site, because sometimes you'll run into clients where um, for whatever legal reasons, they may not want the work that you're doing for them on your site. So if you can make that part of your contract, that you're not, the work isn't on your site to be either sold or advertised in general to a mass audience, but for the purposes of your portfolio to gain other work. There's a specific term for it, but I can't remember right now. But that's very important for your future business. And then also kind of I don't want to call it more mundane stuff, but just making sure letting them know that any purchases that you make on their behalf, that they will recoup you for it up to a certain amount, like say, I don't know, $5,000. Not to say that you would do that, but if you're going out and you need to buy a bunch of paper or something to print out posters, or maybe there's some presentation things that you need to get, or you need to buy fonts. That's more likely. You need to buy a certain font that they want, or stock images. So having it laid out in the contract that they have to pay for all that stuff. So I think those are some of the more important things. And then the legal language of, if you get into a dispute, you're under the laws of California state, or the laws of New York state, stuff like that. I'm not as well versed in that, but I think those are some of the more important things.
Did that answer your question, Zara?
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
The contracts are a pain in the rear end, but like Cliff said, they're directly tied to how much money you make and how much time you spend on a project. So
that was a great question.
It was. Now in the last year, you've launched your own agency.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like to call it consultancy.
Consultancy. My apologies.
No problem.
Now that's different than being a freelance designer. Can you talk about that experience? Like, how's it change your perspective? How's it change a client's perspective?
Okay, so it's different than being a freelancer because most of the time as a freelancer, you're trading time for money in an hourly rate. And it's not to say that it doesn't happen as a entrepreneur or as a business, but a lot of times, or at least how I'd work now, if I'm going to price something out, it's from the perspective of a fixed time retainer. That's kind of the best term I can say. Sometimes it's specifically a retainer. Other times it might just be a fixed amount of time per hour that'll set for a particular project. The reason that I do that is because it can be a little difficult to balance how much time you spend on something, right? Because you're rewarded more money for the more time you spend on a project, and you're rewarded less money if you are really fast. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. But if I'm pricing for the amount of money that I need to survive as a business, whether that's a project fee or a retainer fee or fixed time fee, it's a little bit more equitable. But coming straight out of college as a freelance designer or an in-house, there's nothing wrong with going by the hour while you're amassing experience and building your portfolio. That's what I did. And I've even, had pro bono clients to help me just build my experience and portfolio. But anyways, going back to the consultancy model and starting my own thing, at some point I realized that being in corporate wasn't going to be for me, that in terms of my purpose as a designer or as an entrepreneur, I just function better outside of that structure where I could help people build something. So, and then also focusing on being a resource for diverse entrepreneurs and conscious companies is something that I could focus on instead of being in-house somewhere where the values might be out of line with what mine are. So the road has been tough and extremely difficult, probably the most difficult thing I've ever taken on in my career. Probably it is. So it's not all, it's not all champagne and, and shrimp and lobster. It's a a lot of top ramen and bush beans. So it's a long time. I'm still in the process of building the business up to a point where it's completely sustaining me. So I'm very much in the building process. So entrepreneurship, solopreneurship is not for the faint of heart. And that's not to say I would never go back to corporate. It would just have to be the right kind of gig. But again, I would say that straight out of college, it's really important to build up that portfolio and experience. So that's where hourly can be extremely useful in amassing, again, that experience in your work.
It's about a process. Like you wouldn't have been able to start your own agency if you didn't have all this experience and sort of your own evolution for how you treat design and clients and your processes and all of that. So
yeah, that's exactly it.
The name Duke and Joe, where did that come from?
So long story short, I had a partner about 4 years ago that we were creating an organization that creatives of color could come together and share resources and work on projects and build connections and networks through. And for a while, we were kind of stuck on what the name of the group would be. So as we got a bunch of, I think, images and inspiration together for what would influence the company or the organization, a couple of the images were of jazz great Duke Ellington and Josephine Baker, who was a dancer and kind of like a World War II hero as well. So we are channeling the creative spirits of Duke Ellington and Josephine Baker. So hence the name Duke and Joe.
Nice. It also sounds cool. So
yeah.
Now, you and I have talked before, and you alluded to this at the beginning of the presentation. We came in contact after your talk on hidden history, Black Americans in graphic design. I was an art major focusing on design when I was in college many years ago. I won't specify how many, but all the designers I studied were white males, kind of like I am now, right? It wasn't until later that I realized how limited that perspective was. And honestly, I found your talk really interesting. I'd heard of the work by W.E.B. Du Bois, but I hadn't heard of Charles Dawson or Sylvia Harris, some of these others. What is that changing? How is that changing? Do you have thoughts on this? Like, what led you to make that video?
Okay, so
this is a big question and it's very vague. I apologize.
No, it's okay. What led me to it is, when I was in high school and college, maybe I would say it was more so on a subconscious level. I recognized there weren't Black designers in my class or the people that we learned about. It kind of been so ingrained in me. I didn't really consciously question it. It's just kind of how it was. So after graduation and years of being in New York, I think that the community that I was part of was very much about Black activism and also having a better understanding of Black history. So it was from that standpoint that I started to try to learn a little bit more about Black design, but still, I didn't know a lot. And then I want to say December, someone reached out to me from an ad agency in Connecticut, and she wanted to put together a talk on Black American designers in history. So I hadn't given a talk about that before, but I took it as an opportunity to do a deep dive in the research. And through doing all that research, I found out about so much history that I never knew was even there. Certain things I had seen before, but I didn't know what the origin was. So it kind of reframed how I thought about design, and also how Black Americans or Africans in the diaspora had a legacy and history within design. So it was kind of a reframing of how I saw design. That's probably the most beautiful part about it. So that education was, so linking that to how we're doing today. I think it just kind of exposed the inequities within the industry even more. I mean, we hear so much about inequities within the kind of verbal language of the 21st century that, that we have right now. But, in the presentation, I say, actually, I have it right here because there was a quote that I wanted to make. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunters. So I'm trying to be the role of the lion historian and be like, hey, there's all this stuff out here. There's W.E.B. Du Bois, who completely got lost in history, but is very instrumental into the development of infographics and data-driven graphics and modern design and modern art. And also Emmett McBain, who was kind of like the Black Don Draper in the advertising industry back in the, I believe it was the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And Sylvia Harris is kind of like the godmother of modern UX design. So much stuff got lost within history. And it showed me that we were there, but again, hidden. But then also there's such a long way to go because there's so many things that influence each other, like the education system influences who gets hired, your network influences who gets hired in these positions within corporate advertising or design studios. And all these things kind of work together within a system to produce the outcomes that it produces when it comes to inequalities within, whether it's a design industry or any other industry within America. So that was the most important thing for me to realize. I now see that so today I'm connected to more communities of Black creators and designers than I've ever been. But the inequities still exist in the sense that I think we're about 3% of, according to AIGA, 3% of working designers are Black. And it's a little bit higher for, it's definitely higher for Asian designers. And I think white designers make up 71% of the industry, something like that. And we also earn less too, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot of work to do when it comes to addressing inequities from all the way down from K through 12 education to college to networks to putting Black designers in positions in companies. So there are things happening that could alleviate it. The question is is what happening genuine, or is it just for right now? Are we going to go back to what happened before, or is this something sustainable?
Right. Is it just a buzzword now that we're reacting to, or are we actually committed to it?
Yes, exactly.
DTC as the department has been putting a lot of thought into this because we've hopefully are recognizing it here. Do you have any particular recommendations or resources that students can be looking at? People they can be following? You're muted.
Thank you. One resource would be Where Are the Black Designers? It is a Slack group where there's conversation around resources, positions that are open, events where you can kind of get to know Black designers that are out there. Another resource is African American Graphic Designers Group on Facebook, where there are critiques that are happening, different webinar talks that are happening. There's a lot of job recommendations that are happening. And then there are organizations like, I think it's Made in Brooklyn. It's an organization that helps kids from inner city areas be able to apprentice within design jobs. It's a really great program, actually. And then I'm actually just looking at my list of resources. There is Creative Reaction Lab, which is, I think it's based out of Missouri. And that's more about kind of experience design and changing system changing design, bringing inner city our marginalized youth together to find solutions to some of the most pressing problems to the community. So those are all great resources. I know that AIGA has the diversity and equity program, or part of the organization that that they're trying to do their part. I actually need to do a little bit more research on what they're doing. But there's a number of resources out there, and more keep popping up every day. So it's more so just companies and organizations taking the time out to do the research and reach out to people that are connected to these groups, because in a sense, there really is no excuse now. Just have to put in the effort.
I've been lurking on Where Are the Black Designers for a while. In fact, that may be where I came across your video.
Oh, yeah,
first.
that's right. I think I remember that now.
So, but there's a lot of good resources there if you're interested. Bethany Loomis asked a question here. Do you have a favorite video from the future? If not, is there a video from the future you would recommend watching?
Okay, so one would be Chris Doe, who's the head guy there. He did a video on pricing on the Future channel, which is probably one of the most viewed, in my estimation, one of the most important videos he's done, because he really breaks it down to hourly pricing versus value pricing. And I think that if you watch it multiple times and you're able to get an understanding of it, it's gonna put you in a position to kind of be ahead of the curve, outside of school. Number one. And then number two, he did a video, I think it was one of the last videos on the Future channel that he did with Jose Caballero, where they were talking about what was the name of it? Basically, like being vulnerable within your creative practice and within your public presentation. Hold on one second. I'm going to get the name of the video right now, because that is one of the most important videos, because it kind of shows that kind of maybe a bit of different philosophies, how to be more relatable. That was a very important video about, once you step into the arena of trying to put yourself in a position where, whether you're in-house or in the studio or entrepreneur, the problem is going to kind of be the same, where how do you build an audience if you have an interest in that? Because there are some jobs now where they're even in corporate in-house, they're looking at your social media to see, what's going on with that and how much you resonate with people. So, I mean, that's a whole nother journey. I mean, when I first came out of college, I couldn't be more closed up and not vulnerable. It took a lot of years to get to a point where I could share certain things about myself. And that directly related to how much I was comfortable with those things internally about myself. So video on pricing and video on how to be more relatable.
Great question. Hey, I want to be cognizant of the time here. It is 1:30. Students, do you have any other questions for Cliff?
I would love to interface with you guys if something I said in the presentation might have been a little confusing, if you maybe needed some clarity about something that I didn't quite dive into deep enough. Don't be shy.
They may all be very tired.
That's true. I know my brain wouldn't be able to think of questions if I was coming off of an all-nighter.
Is there any one word of advice, something you wish someone had told you when you were graduating?
A word of advice, something I wish somebody would have told me when I was graduating. I wish somebody would have told me, but then again, I don't even know if the teachers realize how business was changing and how culture was changing. I mean, I kind of wish I had that. I wish after I graduated, like somebody from the business school would have like pulled me to the side, like right after graduation, and told me to get my business straight. But I think just realizing how culture is changing and how the economy is changing and how it's affecting design, realizing that as we go on, the challenges of commodification within design, whether it's linked to automation or outsourcing or all those other type of things that are going on for industries across our economy, just to be ready for that, to continuously be what's happening, and to be infinitely curious, and to not get comfortable within a particular discipline, to nourish that creativity, because one day that creativity could be something that you're actually able to make money off of if you decide that you want to go that route. Levi was asking me about my social stuff, so
You
I'm
had a
just taking.
slide
Yeah,
with stuff. Yeah, there you
actually,
go.
yeah. So
And
you
Emily
can
asked
check me out there.
if they could connect with you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. If you want to send me a DM on LinkedIn or Instagram to continue the conversation or ask me anything, definitely reach out, and I'll try to answer as best I can. But yeah, I just wanted to just kind of hammer home that was the main thing that I wish I realized, is that I just kind of need to continually like be curious and reinvest into myself to make sure that I'm ready for changes that are happening, just to be open to cultural changes, questioning my own beliefs. I think that's one of the big things, is being able to question my own like belief process.
I think, over your career and certainly over my career too, the changes that have happened in culture and in technology, we couldn't have predicted.
No.
If you asked me when I graduated decades ago, if this is where I would have been and where the design industry would be, like, what? I have no idea. Are you kidding?
Oh, and I would definitely say to your students to develop an ability to write or speak about thoughts you have on design, and be able to clearly communicate that, because that is important and will be increasingly important. I've seen at jobs where, I'll have an old school art director, and he knows how to dictate, but he does not know how to communicate with people under him to kind of inspire them, or to present in a way that is able to align multiple stakeholders, whether it be in finance or marketing or whatever. Just didn't have it, because for many years, art director was just very much like production facing or production based, where you just make sure your department is running efficiently, and that's it. But more is expected now from designers than ever.
Yeah, fluency in being able to talk about your design and your concepts, and being able to talk to the business people and the tech people. That's actually a really valuable skill.
Very valuable. It's either equal, or in some cases even more important than a lot of the crafty stuff.
Right. Well, Cliff, thank you so much for your time. It's been really great hearing about your story and how you got where you are, and the challenges you faced, and most importantly, the things you've learned and shared with us. So thank you so much.
And thank you for having me on tour. It's been great talking with you, and great talking with some of your students. Yeah, this was fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Best of luck with your final exams and your final projects.
Good luck, everybody.